The original PlayStation ushered in a number of iconic games that are still around and talked about today. WipEout is one of those games. It's one of those games all the cool people played and made others want to play. It was able to carve a name for itself despite often being compared to Nintendo's own F-Zero franchise. Though unlike F-Zero, WipEout would at least last a bit longer. But as always, with a changing gaming landscape and a studio closure, it has been a long time since we have seen a new original main entry in the WipEout series. Could this be the end for the well-known series? In 1994, the PlayStation will launch in Japan, followed by a North American and a European launch in 1995, which the very first WipEout would launch with. WipEout was developed by Psygnosis, who themselves had a large history of popular games before they were acquired by Sony Computer Entertainment in 1993, though the studio would act independent from the company for a number of years. Contrary to WipEout being a known PlayStation exclusive today, many actually don't realize that WipEout never started out as a true PlayStation exclusive. The first title in the series was actually released on both the PlayStation and the PC in 1995, and on the Sega Saturn in 1996. WipEout was applauded for its original concept and featured an incredible techno soundtrack, a soundtrack that would prompt other developers to show the importance of music in video games, while also bringing awareness to the underground techno community in England. Its artwork and marketing campaign was created by Designers Republic, a studio that would work alongside future WipEout entries for years to come. The game's artwork was aimed at the fashionable, club-going, music-buying audience of the time. The game even appeared in the 1995 film Hackers as a non-playable CGI mock-up. But the game's success wouldn't be without its own controversy. A promotional print ad featured a blood-stained couple that many took as a drug overdose rather than the adrenaline-fueled rush the ad was going for. Even the game's lead artist suggested that the E in WipEout stood for ecstasy, which the game's designer denied. Regardless, the game would be successful enough to spawn a whole series of games that will last for years to come. WipEout XL, as it was known in North America and in Japan, arrived in 1996 for the PlayStation with a release on the PC and the Sega Saturn in 1997. In other regions, the game is known as WipEout 2097 and takes place 4 decades later after the original game. Improving upon everything in the original, XL included new weapons and tracks, a new damage interface, and players will now be up for a faster, more dangerous, and more competitive racing league than ever before. WipEout originally was never set to receive a sequel. Instead, XL was meant to be a track add-on pack for the original WipEout. The North American release was called XL because the developers felt that Americans couldn't understand the concept of a game being set a century in the future if it was called WipEout 2097. The game also features heavy promotion for the Red Bull energy drink. If you look back at WipEout's history, WipEout 64 is the one title that truly stands out. It's the only game to not release on the original PlayStation, but instead on the Nintendo 64. During this time, WipEout series developer Psygnosis had already been owned by Sony Computer Entertainment for 5 years, but Psygnosis had been independent from the owner at the time. Taking place a year after WipEout XL, 64 introduced analog control to the series, new weapons, teams, and altered tracks from the original WipEout and its sequel, as well as 4-player split screen. Ultimately, it was a heavily tweaked version of WipEout XL. F-Zero X was released a month earlier, and since both games have a similar concept, many comparisons were made among critics, and many questioned if WipEout 64 was a true sequel to WipEout XL. WipEout 3 in 1999 would finally see the series become a PlayStation exclusive title. A more believable approach was given to the game's look and feel of its futuristic courses. It's also the very first WipEout game to take advantage of the analog sticks introduced in the PlayStation DualShock controller. The developers made the game feel more accessible to new players, with an easy start to early courses that gradually become more difficult in later courses. Europe will gain an exclusive special edition re-release the following year in 2000 that included additional tracks and content. It truly is the ultimate version of WipEout 3. But WipEout 3 itself would be considered a financial disappointment. Sometime after the release of WipEout 3, Psygnosis would consolidate into Sony Computer Entertainment and would be renamed to Studio Liverpool, with the development team now reporting directly to Sony Computer Entertainment Europe, rather than being more independent as it was before. From the original PlayStation, the jump to the PlayStation 2 was when the series was starting to lose the shine it once had. WipEout Fusion is a largely forgotten title in the WipEout legacy. Parts of the game were praised, while many felt that the game just didn't evolve enough to keep up with other games at the time. Studio Liverpool wanted this game to appeal to an older, savvier crowd. and after the release, the game's chief designer would admit that the series was starting to emulate games like F-Zero. WipEout had lost its cool factor, and soon it was back to the drawing board for the next game in the series. WipEout Pure would be a launch title with the PlayStation Portable in 2005, taking place 100 years after WipEout XL. The developers had learned from their mistakes with WipEout Fusion, and this would reflect in positive reviews by critics. Pure was also the first PSP game ever to support downloadable content, but it was only available through the official WipEout Pure website, so if you want them today, third-party websites have since preserved them for download. A sequel to WipEout Pure would hit the PSP in 2007 with WipEout Pulse, taking place 10 years after the events in Pure. The developers took the feedback of Pure and made sufficient changes to Pulse to make the game more accessible to all players. Downloadable content packs include new ships, tracks, and campaign grids for a total of 4 packs, but they were only available in the European PlayStation stores. Due to the overwhelming popularity of the PlayStation 2 in the UK, WipEout Pulse would later get re-released on the PlayStation 2 exclusively in Europe in 2009 and featured enhanced graphics, 2-player split screen, and all previously released DLC. WipEout would make its big debut on the PlayStation 3 in 2008, but with a twist. Rather than releasing straight to disc, the game would launch on the PlayStation Store. The studio has said it wanted to show that downloadable content doesn't have to be focused on minor games, and these days we can see how much of that rings true. The game consists of remastered tracks from the 2 previous PSP titles in full glorious 1080p and 60 frames per second. An expansion titled Fury would release in 2009 and added in things like new racetracks, ship models, game modes, and a new campaign mode. WipEout HD and its expansion were one of the games users could choose as part of Sony's Welcome Back program after the 2011 PlayStation Network outage. And for those who love having a physical copy, a European exclusive disc contains both the main game and its expansion, and the PS3 is region-free, so it will play without issue. The last true and original WipEout game would launch on the PlayStation Vita in 2012. WipEout 2048 is a prequel to the entire series and takes place in the years of 2048, 2049, and 2050. This is the game that helped the Vita become what it is. Obviously, the PSP was in desperate need of a second analog stick, and thankfully the developers were able to have great input for the Vita's design with a second analog stick and the back touchpad. What is really cool about 2048 is how WipEout HD and its Fury expansion pack from the PlayStation 3 are fully playable within the Vita game itself as DLC. It turns 2048 into 2 whole games, and that is one impressive package for such a small cartridge. On top of its online mode with other Vita players, the game featured cross-platform play with PlayStation 3 owners of WipEout HD. Unfortunately, WipEout 2048 and WipEout HD would also have its online server shut down in March of 2018. But long before then, Sony would close longtime WipEout developer Studio Liverpool in the latter half of 2012 after performing an assessment of its European studios. After the closure of Studio Liverpool, the series would be in limbo for years, with many wondering if a new game would even happen. But in 2017, the WipEout franchise would culminate with WipEout Omega Collection on the PlayStation 4, which include remastered versions of WipEout HD and its Fury expansion, and WipEout 2048. Despite being a remastered collection, it did help ease the concerns of many who are questioning Sony's possible abandonment of the franchise, but even with its incredibly stunning and beautiful upgraded visuals and PSVR support, it was still a rehash of what came before, and didn't really end up leading to a brand new original game on the console. And a new WipEout game really missed out on showcasing the possibilities of the PlayStation 4 as it had with other consoles. Before the closure of Studio Liverpool, the studio was at work on 2 titles for the PlayStation 4. One is said to be a motion capture based game reminiscent to Splinter Cell, and the other would be a brand new WipEout title that would be dramatically different than what has come previously and was in development for at least 18 months before being cancelled. But not all is entirely bad. Despite the closure of Studio Liverpool, a number of its employees would form FireSprite, who have developed games like The Playroom and The Playroom VR on the PlayStation 4, Run Sack by Run for mobile devices in the Vita, The Persistence, and as the making of this video are developing Housin Call of the Mountain for the PlayStation VR 2. Ironically, FireSprite was acquired by Sony Interactive Entertainment in September of 2021, where the studio's success has allowed them to move to a larger office space. Maybe there is a chance for a new WipEout by FireSprite in the future. But in 2021, a brand new WipEout game would be revealed called WipEout Rush, but it would be a mobile exclusive for iOS and Android devices. Of course, this announcement led to an overall negative reaction from players and longtime fans. Between the closure of Studio Liverpool and the lack of an original title outside of a remastered collection, it's quite understandable why people are pissed at the game returning with a mobile game. It certainly doesn't mean the series is fully going mobile, but it also isn't the way to make WipEout's grand return. The game would later be retitled to WipEout Merge in 2022, and as the making of this video has yet to be released worldwide and is still in early access for certain regions. The game isn't necessarily about having direct control of a ship in each race, but rather managing cards to deploy weapons and take down rivals. However, 2021 would also bring about the rumor of a new WipEout game on the PlayStation VR 2, but like any rumor, until we have an official reveal, take this rumor with a grain of salt. Though I really wouldn't be surprised to see a WipEout game with PSVR 2 support, since Sony did experiment with this for the Omega Collection. It will be interesting to see how this possible new developer evolves the series. With the studio closure of the original developers, a remastered collection years later for the PlayStation 4 but no new original game for the platform, and a return with a mobile game, WipEout may not be entirely dead, but there's been a lack of love and attention for such an iconic series that has been there since the birth of PlayStation itself. Yes, the gaming landscape is always changing, and WipEout may not be as hot as it once was, but just as the series was going to take a chance and drastically take a risk in its approach, the studio closes. Fingers crossed the rumors of a new entry are true, because there is still interest in the series, and hopefully the Omega Collection helped show Sony this. But let me know in the comments below, do you think it's the end of WipEout, or do you think we'll see a brand new entry on the PlayStation 5? Please be sure to like and subscribe for future content, and please be sure to check out these other videos questioning if it's the end of these beloved franchises. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.